啊，
开始要注意点说。你买了多少
4277。
All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our first event. I'm Steven. On behalf of ChinaForesee, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. Our group was formed just this winter, but despite being so young, we're highly motivated to bring to Northwestern deeper insights on issues relating to China, as well as bring about greater understanding on Sino-American relationship. We're honored to invite Northwestern's highly distinguished professors, Witte and Shih, to share with us their valuable insights on current-day China under the new leadership of President Obama. Before we begin, I'd like to draw your attention to the survey sheet you received at the door. Please help us improve by completing the survey before you leave and returning to the table outside. Please note that there will be a combined Q&A session with our professors after both speeches. So do hold your queries till after the speeches. This is the flow of our program tonight. And our very first speaker, Professor Witte, graduated from Northwestern University with a PhD in economics and concentrates mainly on the study of consumption and environmental economics. Today, he will be talking about the U.S. economic situation and the effects it has on Sino-American relationship. Without further ado, let's invite Professor Witte on stage.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I'm very flattered to have been asked here. And it's a great honor to be here with Professor Shih. I'm a macroeconomist and not really an expert on China, but we actually are lucky enough to have really great experts on China. And we were saying before the talk, he's the kind of guy who universities pay a lot of money to come in and sell books. So if you like this speech, he'll probably be too modest to say it, but he's got a great new book out. And I'd unfortunately let out my copy, otherwise I'd be cribbing from it madly. All right, so we have this new administration that is probably going to take a different approach to the world, hopefully much more engaged and polite and less arrogant perhaps than the predecessor. Then 2 weeks ago, the Treasury Secretary designate, Tim Geithner, came out and said, well, President Obama, backed by the conclusions of a broad range of economists, believes that China is manipulating its currency. And went on to say that the new administration would, quote, use aggressively all diplomatic avenues to use all diplomatic avenues open to him to seek change in China's currency practices. Like, well, there went those hopes for a warm and amicable engagement. But this is sort of a strange thing for the Treasury Secretary to say, because much of what he complained about is sort of old news, and if anything has been passing away, and that China has been pursuing a policy of managing its exchange rate, which is something that almost every country does. China perhaps its exchange rate is a bit below parity, maybe 40%. And you'd say, well, 40%, that sounds like a large number, but these numbers are extremely flexible or fuzzy, and the amazing exchange rate imbalance right now, I would say, is between the US and England, where, good heavens, the pound and the dollar are almost on par, where not so long ago, the dollar was approaching, well, it was approaching $2 to the pound. And so for the US to complain about China's exchange rate, just extraordinary. Well, so what is going on with the macroeconomics of the United States versus China? Well, the United States has a recent history of having a very strong consumption sector, is a way to put it politely, that we don't save a large share of our income, and we spend a lot of that on housing, an extraordinary amount, and a lot of that on imports. And for a long time it was fine that we did that you don't have to save very much if what you've invested your savings in grows rapidly. So if equity markets and home prices are rising, then wealth grows even without saving very much. And so it worked very well while those things were rising. Not so well the last year, and probably not so well the next year or so to come. Now, China has a different set of problems. I mean, the United States is a very wealthy country. We worry about income inequality issues, but again, compared to countries like China or India or Russia, Brazil, our income inequality issues are just not that interesting. Whereas China is really going through what is sometimes referred to as the big leap development, that going from being a poor country to a no longer poor country. And a lot of times you think of that as sort of everybody edging up and edging up and edging up, but that's almost never the way it works. And the way it works is that some people become very wealthy, and while most people stay quite poor, and a few people make it in the middle class. And then over time, you sort of see people moving from the poorest group into the middle group, and some people from the middle group moving to the wealthiest group. And it can be a very uncomfortable thing socially to see certain groups becoming incredibly wealthy while many groups stay very poor. And this is a difficult thing to manage, and it's the sort of thing that can create great political unrest. Now, there were, when I was a college student and a graduate student, much of the world was in what we call a planned economy. That you think of the Soviet bloc, you think of China, and Western economists, we all knew that was a transitory phase. It wouldn't last forever, and eventually they'd get on the stick and become capitalist. And China sort of got an earlier step on that, starting to liberalize a little bit. But then the Soviet bloc really seemed to catch up. That they did all the right things. They privatized, they let entrepreneurs do whatever they wanted, and they really sort of took the reins of government control back from the private sector. And I was quite sure this was going to work out very well, and that Eastern Europe was going to rapidly catch up to Western Europe and certainly vault ahead of China. And not so much. Whereas China has taken a much more measured approach. The government has continued to hold a much larger role in the economy than was true of these sort of former Soviet bloc countries, and has really preserved order to a much greater extent. And key to that, I think, was keeping growth of the rural sector apace. And that there's been strong growth, certainly along the urban areas, along the seaboard, where growth has been tremendous. Growth has been, wealthy people from there are wealthy people by any standard, and that there's a strong middle class there. This last issue of The Economist magazine was actually analyzing countries that are moving into this sort of middle class phase, and that China, I think it was 800 million people are, by some measures, middle class, and that is seen as a tremendous success, and I think that's a reasonable thing to say. But that China, in some ways, is a little bit like the U.S., that we're both